Well, I just want to give a few bits of information for context. We have been very excited that we have over 150 members who are very actively engaged in our public policy initiatives, and those individuals not only fuel a lot of the policy work we do, but they also form working groups to do in-depth study of issues that are surfacing that impact our economy in North Texas, as well as the commercial real estate business. We also, our political action committee has been very actively engaged in supporting representatives and senators, as well as local officials in issues that we are aligned in interest. And so through that effort, we're very pleased to support the representative in his new role, or not new, second time we've supported the representative. So we appreciate his support and relationship. And lastly, I'll mention that we are part of a statewide coalition of other organizations similar to ours, the Real Estate Councils of Texas. And so we will be visiting Austin in February, and hopefully we'll be able to visit you in your office while we come to Austin and talk about the issues that are important to the economy for Texas and for North Texas. So we're excited about that. And so without further ado, my name is Linda McMahon. I'm president of the Real Estate Council. But I want to introduce Heath Cheek, who is a partner with Bill Nunley and Martin. And Heath has been really actively engaged with our organization. And we thank Bill Nunley for their support of TREC Talks, which this is another version of that. So Heath, I'll let you introduce the representative, and then we will have a Q&A following. If you'd like to put questions in the chat, you can certainly do that after the representative makes his remarks. And then we'll conduct the Q&A from that. So thanks again. And Heath, thank you so much for your support and all the work you do for the Real Estate Council.
Thank you, Linda. And Bill Nunley and my partners, myself, we're very happy to support this TREC Talk series. So we all have a chance, along with you all, to hear from different decision makers who are going to make a difference on our state and local government. And now that we're past the election, we now know what our government's going to be. And we also know that there are a lot of major issues that are going to be facing the state and the Texas Legislature here in the next few months. Some of which related to COVID, some of them related to redistricting, and some of them just related to just normal business. And so for that reason, we're very excited to be able to have our guest speaker here today, Representative Gio Capriglione. He is a fourth-term state representative representing District 98. That district covers Grapevine, Colleyville, Southlake, Keller, Westlake, North Fort Worth, and Hazlet. He's currently the chairman of the House Committee on Appropriations. He's a member of the Select Committee on Mass Violence Prevention and Community Safety. He's the co-chair of the Texas Privacy Protection Advisory Council. He's been married to his wife, Elisa, for 19 years. They have 3 children in Carroll ISD schools. He got his BS in physics and MBA in finance from Santa Clara University. And after school, he went to work for a DFW-based venture capital and private equity firm. Today, he's the owner and president of his own small business, Texas Venture Capital, which provides business services to various investment fund managers and business owners. His focus is investing in Texas-based small businesses. And so with that, I will turn it over to him. We're very excited to have him, and join me in welcoming Chairman Capriglione.
Awesome. Thanks so much. I appreciate it. Thanks for the opportunity to be here. If it's okay with you, what I thought I'd do is maybe just give you kind of maybe a 15-minute rundown of where things are, and kind of tell you that, you know, one of the cool things about politics is it's kind of like the weather, right? It's constantly changing, and we're in the middle of all of that. But like you said, we did just have the elections, and for the most part, at least in Texas, things are going to stay relatively the same, right? We went through there's a lot of discussion, of course, because it is a redistricting cycle, you know, how it was all going to play out. But for myself, I'm just super honored and thankful to be able to be working on the budget, which was a lot more exciting in January, February, and it just got a little bit more difficult, obviously, during time. Obviously, the number one thing that's going on, that's on everyone's mind, is COVID, and how, you know, the pandemic, how we were able to first and foremost, take care of our family, our friends, and ourselves during this extremely difficult time. And of course, it has, and I'll talk to you about it, how it has impacted obviously the state's finances and local government's finances all over the world, really. And then just talk about maybe what we're going to be doing heading into session. But our priorities for most of us, of course, is to make sure that we deal with this pandemic. One of the things that happened in March almost immediately, for all of you that know, is I started shopping less, started going out less, started doing less tourism, less of everything, high unemployment and so on. And what that's meant for the state budget is, as of right now, a pretty big deficit, at least by Texas standards. So one of the things that happened almost immediately is unemployment went higher. And I kind of start out with this stat to give you an idea of the magnitude. From September of last year to March, which was the first 6 months of this fiscal year, the state had paid about $23 million in unemployment insurance claims. We had record unemployment. Our sales numbers were well ahead of projections. So we had paid about $23 million. As of today, including federal dollars and state dollars, we paid out about $50 billion in unemployment claims here in the state of Texas. The state's portion is about $5 billion. And what that's meant is obviously our unemployment insurance fund wasn't able to do that. So we've been borrowing money from the feds to be able to pay even our federal uninsurance claims. At the same time, the federal government, sent out a bunch of money through the CARES Act, through different federal appropriations bills. But the bulk of it was in about $11 billion. So you'll see, and it's been in the news recently, what we've been doing and what we have left of the $11 billion. But a lot of where that money went was to take care of things that we all had to deal with. So a lot of it was testing, getting testing available for individuals, getting National Guard out there to go and run some of those tests for us. Currently, there's a lot of places in Texas that are facing issues, and so we're paying for surge in those hot spots. So helping to pay for nurses and doctors and other medical professionals to be able to mitigate that. That's become an incredible expense. If you're like me, you have kids who maybe didn't like the online program. A lot of people didn't like the online schooling program from March to June. So one of the things that we did is we put money into improving that. We both reimburse schools for that, and we've also created our own state version of online programming to better provide those kind of support. We also learned, of course, that there's people who don't have internet access either because they can't afford it or it's just not available. So we've put close to $500 million to go and get those hardware devices and internet support out for students all over the state of Texas. And a little bit closer to what it means to individuals, obviously with higher unemployment, people still are not able to pay for everything from their mortgage to their rent. And at one point, just about a month and a half ago, we hit a point where there were about 1 million people in Texas that were close to being evicted from their apartments. So we created a rental assistance program to go and provide support for individuals so that they can navigate that, and also eviction mitigation so that we could get into a win-win deal effectively to be able to get the landlords and the tenants in a better place during all of this. So it's just been an incredible experience, obviously, having money come in and having money come out. One of the things that we've had to do, unfortunately, is the state has had to tighten its belt as well. So the speaker, the governor, and the lieutenant governor came out with their charges, which showed both a 5% interim cut for this cycle. So just to be clear, there's like the budget we're working on now, but in Texas, we do a 2-year budget. So then there will be the next budget cycle, which starts next September. So in the interim, we set a 5% cut. And then for the next 2 years, we've asked every agency to give us a plan that included effectively a 5% cut as well. Now, what we saw was, unemployment still stayed stubbornly high. We're averaging right now about a 5% reduction in our state revenue. And that's, there's different parts of that. So we've seen home improvement projects obviously going really well. A lot more people are buying online than they used to. So we had passed a bill last session, not knowing this would happen, but it was called a Wayfair tax to kind of equalize internet taxing. So we've seen that number go up. However, other things like hospitality, tourism, alcohol, beverage taxes, and so on are way down. Even before the pandemic, we have started to see oil and gas revenues already starting to slow. But obviously, with less travel and so on, we're at the point now where we've seen drilling permits or permits for new drilling down by about 60, almost 70%. All of this has obviously created some headwinds going into the next cycle. But because we did have these elections, we learned really quickly, and hopefully the voters learned where the priorities of all the members are. And for us, that's public health first and foremost, right? We're in the middle of a pandemic, so we have to be able to make sure that people get health care that they need, that they're able to get the testing that they need, that they'll be able to, to get the help that they need, but also that there's hospitals that'll stay open, that they'll be able to get those procedures. And so that's one of our priorities. Second one, of course, is public education. We've all learned, I think, how important the public education system is, especially as people are trying to find work and trying to be able to go and, more importantly, provide education to their children. And so last session, we passed a bill, it's called House Bill 3, that radically improved finances for schools, improved teacher pay raises, teacher salaries. And so we have a commitment to go and make sure that we keep HB3 funded. I get a chance every now and then to go through our schools, and one of my local school districts, I did a tour that's in one of the schools that has both in person and virtual, and they're doing an incredible job. I'll tell you, you go through, I mean, I guess I imagine kids throwing off their masks and doing all this stuff and running around, but actually kids are really well behaved. The schools have done a good job on social distancing, but it's put the teachers in a situation where they have to do a lot of work, right? They're having to both teach the in-person classes and then also manage the kids they don't even get to see. And so we're seeing, on average, teachers spending 60 to 70 hours a week now during class, and I've seen as high as 85 hours per week. So it's really important for us, of course, to make sure that we continue to do that. And the third thing going into session is there's been a lot of discussion, obviously, and we're all going to support the public safety aspect of government, right? So supporting our local law enforcement, supporting our state law enforcement, so they're able to do and make sure that they have the resources they need to keep things safe for all of us. It's one of those budget cycles where it's like, okay, we have all the same issues we've always had, except now we're going to be short, right, in terms of how we'll be able to fund it all. And one thing that I've worked on a while, I have a technology background, but one thing I've seen and is evident more and more is that the state's technology, for lack of a better word, but that's their computer servers, their cloud servers, their hardware devices, all of these things that kind of sit in the background. Their legacy is the nice word for what they are. Some of these systems that we have been running since 1968, is our longest running mainframe that we have. I think it's going to be important for us, in order, as we see more people telecommuting, as we want our state employees to be safe, but also be able to provide those services, so that we can get data about what's going on in a faster, more real-time way. We'll have to go and make sure that we can provide that support for that as well. Now, going into session, obviously, yesterday, actually, we had what's called the Legislative Budget Board meeting, where we set a spending limit going forward. We have a lot of different limits in Texas, and we always choose the lowest of all the limits. But for the spending limit portion, we decided on effectively what is the smallest spending limit increase ever, given all of the uncertainty in how things are going to go moving forward. On the House side, we have a speaker who is retiring. We have effectively chosen our next speaker. I think it becomes more official this Saturday as we go to caucus, but Dade Phelan is going to be the Speaker of the House next session. And we're all getting work. He's already working on setting a group to look at rules and also how business will be done. One of the things that's challenging, we're all, it's a room full of 150 politicians, so we usually start shaking everyone's hands and all that other kind of stuff. And so there's a lot of work being done on making sure that not only do we have the plexiglass and we have all of that, but just as importantly for all of us, we want to be able to make sure that we can talk to our constituents, right? We want them to be able to come to the Capitol. And so we're doing things like changing the HVAC system, getting things in place with TDEM, maybe testing and so on, so we can continue to have that transparency that we all hope to have in the next session. I really don't know yet how many bills we're going to go through and how many are going to work through. On any given year, there's usually about, I think, 6,000 or 7,000 bills that are filed, and we'll pass maybe 1,200 of them. I think this session is going to be a lot harder to go and have a really full-throated conversation about all of those. So we might see something that focuses more on the most important items, which is fine, actually. But there's a lot of positive things that have been going on as well related to our overall economy. I mean, I can't end this without at least saying, how blessed we are to be in Texas. I mean, if you go, and I look at it from the budget perspective, but we're really worried, of course, about having a $4 billion or so budget deficit. California, they're dealing with a $66 billion budget deficit. Property values here in Texas have retained their value. And so that's been helpful for our budget as well. We're still seeing people wanting to come here. And one of the things that I think, look for a silver lining is all of these other states, they're going to have to figure out how to do their revenue, and they're more likely going to raise taxes and do all the stuff that happens in others. So I think for the future, if we focus on our public ed system, if we focus on workforce training, making sure we get jobs and economic development, and have that infrastructure in place, Texas will still be the #1 place for people to look to move to relocate to. So we're going to get out of this, and I think all of the members and all of the state reps that I have the pleasure and honor of serving with are all absolutely focused on the most important things going into this next session. I'm happy to try and answer some questions, or at least avoid a couple of them along the way, if you want.
Well, I'll kick off if you don't mind, while we have any other questions that may surface. I know typically committees, including appropriations, typically host a lot of robust interim hearings over the last year and a half, and obviously that has been seriously hampered by COVID. So what challenges, since you haven't had as much opportunity to really vet the issues in advance, do you see that will present starting in January?
Yeah, I will say I know my staff and the HAC staff and the Senate Finance side of it, we've been working a lot more this intro than we normally do, right? Because of all the different sources of funds. So the federal appropriations bills effectively came in 71 different buckets of money, each one with their own rules, and some of those rules change almost every weekly as Treasury comes up with different things. And of course, we're waiting to see what the new administration and everyone else is going to be doing. But what we did during session, because we were not able to meet out of the abundance of caution, we essentially created an RFI system where all of the interim charges that we had originally asked for went out to the public, and they had about a month and a half, almost 2 months, to go and give us effectively what they would have said if they'd have come in person. That was made available, of course, to all the members, but also publicly available to all. So we've still able to receive the data. We've still been able to have that. Of course, people still call all the members of appropriations, and in some ways, maybe it's better because they're at home talking to their constituents and getting direct feedback from them. But I don't want to minimize just it has been challenging, but I went to, actually, that's the first time I went for the LBB meeting. It was the first time I have been in we've had a meeting in appropriations conference room, and there's plexiglass all on the sides now. I can already see it's going to be a lot more difficult for staff to be there and so on. But we've gotten an incredible amount of information from stakeholders and from agencies and so I think we're ready.
Any questions? Anybody want to ask any questions before I move on? So we have some insight as to, what we think is going to happen. We've planned a lobby day for February for a couple days. We usually start with a cocktail party and then spend the next day visiting all of you in your offices. What do you think that's going to look like next year?
Well, this is my guess as good as yours type of deal. It changes every time I look at it. I would say, I try and answer this thinking, okay, what if it was tomorrow, right? What if lobby day was tomorrow? It probably wouldn't happen that way, right? But I still, for me, I'm a big advocate. I know a lot of other people are too, is we still have to have that ability. So maybe it's, you'll just, maybe it'll be like, okay, you're going to have to get a temperature check. Same things that happen in schools. We found, and I know Abbott Labs and others have been doing really good testing. So that's a lot less invasive, a lot more accurate, a lot cheaper. So maybe so before our meeting yesterday, for instance, right? All of us, and this has happened to me, I've taken about, I think I've hit almost 18 tests so far since this is, and so you just go and they have a little thing set up. So each one of us go into the meeting, we do a self swab, we turn it in, you wait 15 minutes, you get a little I passed gold sticker, and we go in, and it may be something like that, right? And that's good because that provides the comfort for people to go in and that kind of stuff. So I think you'll still be able to come into the Capitol and do all that kind of stuff. You may not be able to get those cocktails at the bar though, because they maybe should.
That's part of the experience, isn't it?
Right.
Well, we have a serious question. Matt Brendel has asked, to solve the budget deficit, do we anticipate dipping into the rainy day fund, cut expenses, or raise revenues? What options do you see for raising revenues if that's not part of the solution?
So in terms of dipping into the rainy day fund, we have about, and we will have about $10 billion in our rainy day fund, which historically is one of the highest amounts that we've had in our rainy day fund. We hit more last session, and we've always gone and used money from the rainy day fund since I've been a member of the House. We've used it for the hurricane, we've used it for water, we've used it for transportation, we've used it for other critical things, and I think COVID is one of those things. So I do see us using some of that rainy day fund money, and I'm not going to say we're going to write a check and drain the rainy day fund by any stretch of the imagination, because we don't have to do that. And also, we don't know if, God forbid, I mean, I'm really hopeful these vaccines will go and start helping everybody, but we are obviously going to leave enough in our rainy day fund to be able to handle something else. But when you go back to the 1980s, when this fund, it's really called the Economic Stabilization Fund, for times when the economy goes and hits a dive because of oil and gas or whatever. And I think this is one of those times when the economy, through really no fault of anybody, something has happened. So I do see us using some of the rainy day fund money at this point. But again, nowhere near all of it. We don't have to do that. In terms of cutting, we've, like I said, the lieutenant governor, and the speaker, they've come out with 5% interim cuts. They've asked agencies to cut 5% going forward. So we are going to ask, the state agencies to reduce their total expenses. And in terms of new revenue, I'll say absolutely, we're not going to be raising taxes, right? I mean, that's not going to happen. And I think that's a benefit that we'll be able to promote while other states do, right? So I don't see us raising taxes or fees or anything like that. In terms of other revenue, the previous chairman Zerwise, he had a little quip, which is like, listen, that's Ways and Means job, appropriations job is to spend the money. So we'll let the legislature decide what they do think that they want to try in terms of others. But I'll give you a quick example of so the rainy day fund. So myself and Senator Nelson, we've worked on 2 different pieces of legislation. And so with the rainy day fund, what I realized was that we had kept it in a checking account that at the time was earning 0.1% interest. So I filed the bill, and Senator Nelson and I, we've taken turns working on this one. But essentially what we did is we raised slightly how much we could, and so the interest income that we've generated just off of the rainy day fund has been almost an additional $250 million per year. So
Wow.
yeah, it was to build it, right? So, but there's a lot of opportunities for us to be more efficient with our dollars and be able to get there.
I like that pocket change that you have.
Right. It is, I'll tell you, I mean, it's something that's helped us, but it's also why a lot of us don't want to spend it, right? Because, you sit there and you're like, okay, you spend it during this hurricane. Well, spend some during Hurricane Harvey, but you never know when the next hurricane is going to come. We'll spend some during this pandemic, but we don't know how long it's going to last. So we're going to be careful with your money.
I can say the work you did in the 86th legislature that really supported public education initiatives was epic for the state. And so we appreciate that. And I'm glad to hear that you want to continue supporting those efforts, because I think it's so essential for the future of Texas. Are there other things that you think you might be championing beyond public education?
I think there's going to be a lot of conversation. I mean, if I was going to pick whatever the top 5, I think obviously the budget is one. I think conversation about public safety, right? I mean, there's going to be a lot of people having, just like there was during the elections, having that conversation. I think redistricting is, while it may not happen during the actual regular session, it doesn't mean a lot necessarily to individuals at home, but it means a lot to the people that represent them. So I think that's gonna be a big part of it. And again, I want to see our ability to do data management go up. I'm big into privacy. I think there's got a lot to talk about. How do we go, and we get hit kind of broadside by this pandemic. So what can we do to minimize the chance? How do we make Texas a better research place, a better place to be able to, the go-to place, if you will, to kind of handle, hopefully, but the next issue that arises?
We know that we've been told by so many people, including the chamber and even the Fed president, has said that there's just such an interest in moving to Texas, particularly from California and New York and other places. And are you concerned about people moving from those typically blue states and changing the policies that that has created the economic stability and growth in Texas? And what do you think we can do to protect the way that Texas does business versus the way other states do business?
Sure. I'm not, listen, I want everyone that doesn't like their state because it's not being like Texas to come to Texas, right? Absolutely. And we all want them. But there's an onus on all of us to help educate our new neighbors about, or remind about why they came here, right? If you go and you look at Illinois or Chicago, or there's a reason why, because they're nearly bankrupt, okay? Because their fiscal policies didn't really work for them. But I mean, we can't just say, oh, we don't want you to come here because you might change your mind. It's on us, right, to go and say, hey, here's why we want to do this as opposed to something like that, because it didn't work somewhere else. And so that's conversations with your neighbors, it's conversations with your family and friends, and say sometimes, I mean, we love saying we passed a fiscally conservative budget, but it's not always politically the easiest thing to do. So we need that support as well as we go and say, you know what, I get it. They have $10 billion in their rainy day fund, but here's why they shouldn't spend all of it, right? Because you end up in a tough situation. So I want as many people to come here who espouse our values.
So do we. We need to build more buildings and add to economic growth in the region. Okay, so Chairman Phelan, is that correct?
Yep.
Phelan?
Yeah.
He's got the speaker votes lined up, and you were a big supporter at the very beginning. And he's also started filling positions in his transition team. What's your outlook for his speakership, and how will it shape the House, and how will it be different from what we've seen before?
Sure. So just in terms of, he has absolutely the votes. He's going to be the speaker next time. In terms of the process, we passed in our Republican caucus, we passed some bylaws that say there's going to be a vote amongst their caucus. that vote happens this Saturday. So we'll go this Saturday. He's the only one running, so we'll all support him there. And then he will officially have that. And I mean, I've had the opportunity to work with him, and that's why I was such a strong supporter. He understands the policies, he understands the issues extremely well. He was the State Affairs Chairman last session, so he get to see a lot of the big bills. When the hurricane issue came up, he was a leader in terms of not only supporting individuals who've been hard hit by the hurricane, but also mitigation, right? So it's one thing to solve the problem, it's another one to go and have solutions for the future. And so he had a lot of experience in that emergency, and this is an emergency too. So I have full faith that he will be able to do that. And he's worked in and around and with the Capitol for a long time. So he's definitely a seasoned veteran. All of that being said, there's a lot to be done, and it's going to be a steep learning curve for all of us, given the new dynamics.
Change is inevitable, of course.
Exactly.
Courtney Spellacy has asked the question, the last legislative session resulted in less local control over development in areas such as preservation and building codes. Do you think this was a mistake? If so, how can we prevent this from happening again, understandably during a time when central control will seem appropriate? Thoughts on that?
There's always been a battle over local control and state control, right? And at the end of the day, what happens, unfortunately, is some municipalities go above and beyond, right? And I think part of this conversation really was in earnest over the property tax conversation, right? Where there were some municipalities, some really close to the Texas Capitol, right, that were always increasing their property taxes, right? I mean, and you'd watch them. We had a deal where it's at 8%. You had to go in and whatever, you could be overruled, right? So they would always go 7.9999. I'm not joking. So would see the things, right? So what we did from the state said, okay, you know what? That's not fair to homeowners. It's not fair to property owners. And so we're going to do something, and we're going to we're still allow revenues to go up for cities at 2.5%, 3.5%. But if you want to go higher than that, you can. You just have to convince, your local community to do that. To me, that was local control at the most local level possible. So that all being said, there's always going to be issues that there's some conflict with that. But I don't know yet what those issues are going to be this next session. But I think the property tax deal, for instance, was a benefit to the Texas taxpayer. And so for me, that's who I represent, and that's who we're going to represent.
And we work an awful lot in affordable housing and trying to help with the policy around affordable housing with the city of Dallas, as well as working in local communities that desperately need housing. I know North Texas suffers from the lack of affordable housing regardless of where you live, because you still need those essential workers that are providing services, and just making minimum wage or elsewhere. There is some interest in being able to do something around property taxes that might be able to keep people in their homes of lower incomes. Do you have any thoughts, or have you had any perspective of that shared with you?
No, the things that I've worked on, again, I tell you, rental assistance, eviction mitigation. Obviously, if you all have some ideas about how to lower property taxes some more, you're going to find a very willing audience as well. The only thing I've worked on homestead exemptions as well, trying to make sure that I was trying to figure out how to make those even higher to go and get the homestead exemption. The town I live in, the cap is at 20%. And so we're trying to figure out a way to increase that from a 20% homestead exemption. But no, I don't know of anything in particular, but if you do, I'm definitely interested in hearing those ideas.
There's someone who's very interested that's on this call.
Okay. Well,
more later on that.
Okay. Absolutely.
And then my last question for you is relating to what we can expect. Any surprises you think we're going to pop up? But before that question, there is a move through several educational institutions. There's a Texas Urban Blueprint Policy Steering Committee that's been formed by the Kinder Institute, LBJ School, and the Bush Institute to really help drive policy towards benefiting urban Texas, which is 85% of our population. I think you're going to hear a little bit more about this come January when their work is complete. However, you know, there has been this push and pull in the state of Texas between urban populations and rural populations, and obviously the rural communities and leadership has been very dominant in the state legislature. How do you feel, what can we do living in urban Texas, and again, driving the majority of the economic growth in the state? What can we be thinking about and doing to really make sure that urban Texas is being addressed and not just worried about what happens in the smaller communities throughout the state? And I'm talking about border communities too, which qualify as urban.
Sure. Well, here's the thing. I mean, it is the state of Texas, so we have to make sure that everyone is getting the same resources and so on. So the first time I learned this, I was a freshman, and for me at the time, Robin Hood recapture was a big issue, right? Which is, you know, when local property values are higher than an average, and then so there's some redistribution. And so where I am, it happens that in an urban area, a lot of times you'll see money go get recaptured and sent to other school districts. So I was making this comment, I'm like, hey, I don't want to pay Robin Hood anymore. And someone from East Texas said, okay, fine, we don't want to give you water anymore. And someone from West Texas said, fine, you don't get any more oil either, right? So the first thing to keep in mind is that we are a state, and we just happen to be a state that's the size and the diversity of a country. But there are things that are unique for each one. So for rural, obviously hospitals are become a big concern, right? As we've seen changes in the health insurance and so on. What for you and I mean, I probably have 7 hospitals on the main drag in front of my house, right? But they may have to drive 50 or 75 miles. On the other hand, there are issues that happen in urban areas that they don't necessarily have in rural. So, you know, we want to take all of those into account for sure. And the fact is, if all of Texas does well, it helps all of us, right? Because let's say a lower income area. And so people will say, okay, well, how do we stop Robin Hood? How do we stop paying for them? Get them wealthier, right? I mean, let's go and focus on poverty. Let's go and focus on getting jobs in those areas. Let's focus on getting workforce or training or education or whatever is needed in those areas. You know, a lot of these places don't have, like what we take for granted on roads and so on. They may not have that access to I mean, there's things called food districts, right? Where there's no ability to even shop at supermarkets. So if we can get those there, whether it's because it's a low-income community or a rural community or some other disadvantaged or distressed community, that helps everyone in Texas.
Well, and something that's near and dear to your heart is growing small businesses.
Yeah. Oh, that's it. And you know what? They've taken the biggest hit on all, I mean, obviously individuals have with the pandemic, but I mean, look at restaurants. Okay, look at what is a typical entry-level small business for almost anyone can start. Those have been almost absolutely clobbered in the middle of all this pandemic. And they make up the bulk of our revenues here in the state. They make up the bulk of the employment. So getting small businesses back on their feet is the fastest way to get individuals back as well.
We agree.
One thing I've learned in all of this is how interconnected everything is. But they can't do that if they don't have daycare. And they can't have daycare if it's shut down because of something else, right? So we're going to work really hard to try and get everything, not a new normal, the old normal, right? Where people are comfortable and safe and healthy.
So post-pandemic, and also looking to the future of the 87th legislature, what do you forecast? What do you forecast post-pandemic? What do you forecast of any surprises for the next session? What haven't we asked you about that we need to be thinking about?
You know, I think, you know, I'll say, you know, during this election, I mean, here's the good news. Nothing really has changed. Okay. And so I would say all of this anxiety over elections and campaigning and all that stuff is gone, and it will be gone for at least a while. But there are things that people have brought up that are genuine concerns we have to look at. Election integrity, right? Trying to get people back to the election process. I think people are worried about and how that all is. So we have to obviously restore faith, and the way to restore faith is to go look at where things were not working. To me, it is going to be different in the sense of we should look at real estate, at least the real estate that the state has, and see if there's opportunities to find better life balances between employees and having to drive into Austin every single day and so on. And at the same time, does that productivity increase end up helping the state as well? I don't know if there's going to be much really outside of COVID or COVID related in this next, and that's okay, because that's the big deal. We hopefully will see vaccinations, availability of vaccinations happening already at the beginning of the year, right? And if that starts happening, then it gets back to faith, and our economy is based entirely on faith.
Well, thank you so much for your time, Chairman. We really appreciate your time, your insights.
Sure.
I just want you to know the importance of having this relationship with you and others at the state level is very, very important. We have 2,200 members that are very interested in what happens in Austin, and
Sure.
so we appreciate the fact that you've been able to share some of your insights and thoughts about the next session. And please know that if we can assist you and your team, your staff in any way, we're going to be watching what happens in Austin, but if there's some resources that we can bring to bear to assist you as you do your very important work in the 87th session, we really would be happy to do that. So thank you again for your time.
Thank you. Thank you. It's a pleasure.
Well, our pleasure completely. And hopefully we'll see you in person soon.
Yep.
And thanks to everyone who was able to participate today. Thanks for making the time. I think it was important for us to hear from the chairman regarding what's going to happen with this next session. Again, Heath, thank you to Bill Nunley and Martin for sponsoring the TREC Talks this year. It's been really, really incredible. And we've had some great speakers this year. So more to come in 2021, since this is our last program for this year. But have a great holiday, everyone. Stay well, stay safe, and thank you very much, Chairman.